This is Dan Dicks here reporting for Press for Truth. In a landmark ruling, the BC Supreme Court has just ruled that a number of First Nations must be given over 1,800 acres of land, essentially suggesting that Aboriginal title should be recognized over private lands. This includes private businesses and private homes. It's absolutely insane. Here's some of the headlines that are going around right now. Canada's longest trial ends in precedent-setting BC land claim ruling for 4 First Nations. The BC Supreme Court has delivered a precedent-setting ruling on a land claim brought forward by 4 First Nations after a multi-year court battle. The piece of land in question is a 750-hectare parcel in Richmond, including city and port lands, farms, golf courses, and commercial properties. And we see here the landmark court ruling has awarded First Nations title over big area of federal and private land in Metro Vancouver. The Cowichan First Nations and several allied First Nations have won a major legal battle, confirming that they hold legal rights to a part of their historic lands in Richmond, as well as the right to fish in a section of the Fraser River for food. The Supreme Court of British Columbia's landmark ruling on Thursday could be highly consequential and precedent-setting, challenging long-held assumptions at the core of Canadian society about the fundamental legality of private property by placing Aboriginal title above fee simple ownership, the standard form of private property ownership in BC and across Canada. And this is the chunk of land we're talking about here that you can see outlined in pink, which has just been given over. And as I said, this includes private land, private businesses, private homes. So you think you own your own private home? I mean, think again. This is what can happen. This is what is happening. As we see here, a bombshell judgment was just released yesterday by BC's Supreme Court declaring Aboriginal title over land in Richmond, including private property. If this stands, it has massive implications for private property across BC. And here we see John Rastad, the BC Conservative leader, chiming in here, saying, "Private property rights are the foundation of our democracy and our country. Any decision that attacks our private property rights needs to be appealed and overturned. Indigenous title and private property rights cannot coexist over top one another. Losing private property rights on your home, your land, and undermining the rights that underpin our country is wrong. Reconciliation cannot be achieved by taking away the rights from one group and giving them to another." Now, I find it a little bit hypocritical of John Rastad to be saying this, a little too late, too soon, too late. I mean, this guy was actually in favor of UNDRIP, which I covered here last year in this video. The UN is stealing land. UNDRIP is a massive land grab masquerading as restitutions. UNDRIP, of course, stands for the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was established in 2007 as a way to use the idea of giving restitutions to the natives as a means of taking over the land in Canada and around the world. So in this video, Dan Dicks of Press for Truth speaks with Ron Vaillant, a PPC candidate who has been researching and exposing the issues with UNDRIP for over 5 years. And joining me on the line right now, once again, is Ron Vaillant. So Ron, thank you so much for taking some time to speak with us here today on Press for Truth. The last time we spoke last year, we were breaking all this down, and everything that you were warning about in that video is basically happening right now. It's literally going on right now in British Columbia in this precedent-setting case. So what can you about this particular case that just happened here in BC, which was everything you were warning about happening right now?
Yeah, well, thanks for covering this, Dan. I mean, this is such an important issue, the biggest untold story in Canada. And really what's happening with this court case is kind of a sidewinder in the whole thing, because it's not addressing some of the things that were going on with Vancouver, because Vancouver has been claimed by 3 Indian bands, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam. And that's the reason why the Musqueam were fighting this, actually, because they're saying it's their land. But so now you have this thing where they're actually the Supreme Court is saying, look, these guys have title to this land, and it doesn't matter if you have private property on top of that. And so what's happening now is this is just like a little bubble coming to the surface of this huge, massive iceberg underneath, the sea that's being built up all around us as we speak by all kinds of politicians and groups and everything else. And the average person has absolutely no idea what's going on. And so this is actually good in that way, in that it actually is, it's talking about these 1,800 acres or whatever it is. But really, we're talking about all of Canada, all its territories, waters and seaways, and all of its resources are going to be given over to the Indian, Inuit, and Métis people through Bill C-15, which is a federal bill that passed. And when the whole Kamloops grave story surfaced up, that was basically at the time when it was going through the House. And if you were to say anything against this bill, you were like racist. And, don't you know the children are dead over in Kamloops, and we did all this stuff and all the guilt and shaming that went on with that. But the funny thing is I heard about that Kamloops grave story 20 years earlier. They just, repackaged it, I guess, at a convenient time to be able to run this through. And this is for everything. This is for all of the cards. It's going to be, you won't have, you'll be a settler on someone else's land. That's the whole thing. And you're going to be under their governance, because if you live in someone's house or their apartment, they call the shots. That's just the way it is. And you see our politicians, leaning up in this direction. You got Eby over there doing the same thing. You got Smith, saying that we're on your land, in Alberta. And so this case actually is important to show people, hey, look, this is really going on now.
Well, there's literally private homeowners and private businesses located within this area of Richmond, BC, that's just being handed over to the First Nations. What's it going to mean for those kind of people? If, let's say, in the future they want to sell their own home, are they going to have to get permission to do so from these Aboriginal communities, or how is that going to work? Because this should be very concerning to any private landowner in Canada.
Well, it's for everything. It's all businesses too. And it's actually mentioned in the article near the end, how Richmond Council were talking about how this is going to actually, devastate their governance even, and, investment and everything else. I mean, it's a fundamental change. As this goes through, it's through UNDRIP, and UNDRIP is this document here. It's a very thin document, but it's the United Nations, and it's what they think the rights of the Indigenous people should be. And the whole thing is that they don't identify who the Indigenous is in the thing here as well. But when you look at it, if they are granted all of these rights, and this is what Bill C-15 was all about, that all Canadian law has to be in compliance with UNDRIP, basically. Right, and that's been going on now for a long time, since 2021, and all of this is being built up. And so, if you're on someone else's land or house or whatever, then they call the shots, and that's what it's going to be. And so, the government is going to have to cater to the various different Indian bands. They call them First Nations, but they're not really nations. They never were. I mean, I remember back when I was growing up, it was the Cowboys and Indians, it was North American Indian. That's what we called them, and it wasn't a slang or derogatory term. And really, any Indian today wants to be called an Indian, not an Indigenous, because they realize that that's just a globalist term. But then it got switched over. You got to call them Aboriginals, and then it got changed over. Oh, no, it's First Nations now. And this whole thing is just kind of like set up. Well, they're the First Nations, Well, no, they were nomadic, tribes running around, living in the Stone Age, and then a bigger tribe came in and took over. That's really what happened. But now we're going to go back 300 years. That's what everything is going to be subject to their laws and to their customs and their pagan way of lifestyle. And people are going to have to comply and give the Heil Hitler salute to this whole thing in order to be able to even exist. I mean, if you want to graduate high school in BC now, you have to take a 4-credit mandatory course on Indigenous studies. And in there, you learn about reconciliation, you learn about how we're on their land and all this indoctrination and stuff like that. And if you disagree as a student and say, hey, this is, bogus, right? and you fail that, you're not going to get a high school education. Or if you want to, practice law or do a real estate agency, you're going to have to go ahead and take their courses. And it's all being shoved down from the top down. And all of this is like such a huge, monstrous thing. And even when the king came over, or Charles, he acknowledged that he was on the unceded territory of the Algonquin, I think it was, right? So he's actually saying, look, Ottawa here is on Indian land. And so it's coming from the top down, and it goes all the way through, and everyone's being forced to comply. And if people don't want to go and say anything against it, because if they do, they'll lose their jobs. They might lose their retirement, pensions and everything else like that. So everyone kind of goes along to get along. And here we are now, and this is the situation, right? But this thing is just small. This is just a small little thing because, like I said before, you got 3 Indian bands who've claimed all of Vancouver, and no one hardly even knows about that, right? And then the city council says that they are the rights and title holders of all that land, and that's because of court cases. And that's the whole thing about this article. I mean, maybe we should kind of look at the article a bit as we go through, but, it all has to go to, well, it's kind of complicated to say right now, but let's kind of go through some of this stuff maybe, and we'll see what we can identify.
Well, like you said, these land acknowledgements, like from the king, and pretty much you can't go to a protest in British Columbia or Canada without hearing these land acknowledgements. And like you said, this is going back, 150, 200, 300 years of different people conquering other groups and other groups conquering. This is history.
Oh, yeah.
This is how things go, So, I mean, none of these people are even alive today. I mean, so to call
they should be glad it wasn't the Muslims that came here first. There wouldn't be an Indian around.
Right.
They would have killed them all.
And and as you said, this is just like the tip of the iceberg. This is just the beginning here, because it really all plays into UNDRIP, which is a United Nations plan of carrying out this reconciliation. So we're not just talking about private land ownership in Canada alone. This is a global agenda here, right?
It is, yeah. It's basically, I mean, to understand these small little things that have come up, you have to see the big picture. And the big picture is, you had the World Economic Forum posting a video on their website that said by 2030 you'll own nothing and be happy. To go one step behind that, actually, I'd like to read, I got to find the article here. This is actually a book I bought, and you can maybe pull up the graphic. I sent it to you, and I'll just read it to you. And this is a book I bought in 1992 because, I was researching all this stuff back in the 80s and whatnot. And this is a book written by Malachi Martin. And he is a Jesuit professor, or was, I guess he's not living anymore, but a Jesuit professor and Vatican insider. And so he had all the connections, and everything else, and he knew what was going on. So he wrote this huge, thick book. I only made it halfway through because of all of the Jesuit verbiage, you have to go through in order, but anyhow, this actually, tells you what's the game plan here. And I'll just read it. It says, willing or not, ready or not, we're all involved in an all-out, no-holds-barred, 3-way global competition. And then in brackets, I added this, between the West, communism, and the papacy, because that's what the whole book is about. And that goes on. Most of us are not the competitors, however. We are the stakes. For the competition is about who will establish the first one-world system of government that has ever existed in the Society of Nations. It's about who will hold and wield the dual power of authority and control over each of us as individuals and over all of us as a community. The competition is all out because now that it has started, there's no way that it could be reversed or called off. And this is back in the 90s, right? One more paragraph here. No holds barred because once the competition has been decided, the world and all that's in it, our way of life as individuals and of citizens and of nations, our families, our jobs, our trade, commerce, money, our educational systems, and our religions, and our cultures, even the badges of our national identity, which most of us have taken for granted, all will have been powerfully and radically altered forever. No one can be exempted from the effects. No sector of our lives will remain untouched. Okay, so this is what's going on in the background. It's this competition thing that's happening. And when you see all the different pieces of the puzzle happening with, these UNDRIP and all, the mass migration of flooding, the West with all these people. It really has a big effect on, it's all part of the different, it's so comprehensive and so segmented in all different kinds of areas that for people to kind of grasp the enormity of it all, it's just too huge in a sense, but so this is just one little aspect, thing bubbling up. And so here we are. We're basically in a situation in Canada where we're going to be second-class citizens unless we're the Indigenous, which is identified in the Constitution as the Indian, Inuit, or Métis. And they're going to be used actually by the UN to achieve UN Agenda 21 because what they wanted to do there is they wanted to deindustrialize the world. And maybe you could maybe add on to this video is a video I'll send you with David Lamenta. He was the Justice Minister for the Liberals. And okay, so Bill C-15 passed in 2021 at the end of July there. Okay, and then they've been working on a whole UNDRIP strategy plan for the nation. And then so this 1-minute video, he's talking about that plan and how they work together and everything else.
We knew that our next challenge was to work together to develop the action plan. Indigenous leadership pressed us to work together to deliver an action plan in 2 years. And C-15 at the time was amended to do that. And we made it. And we made it. This is a transformational document that holds potential and opportunity beyond the words written within its pages. So what's in the action plan? It will guide the steps the Government of Canada will take in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis to implement the principles and rights set out in the UN Declaration and to advance reconciliation in a tangible way. It includes 181 distinct measures aimed at upholding the human rights of Indigenous peoples. Undoing 150 years of colonialism doesn't happen in the life of a single government. As I've said before, we have to identify and strip away layer after layer.
The final conclusion there is that to decolonize, 150 years of colonization is to take that down is more than the mandate of one government. So the whole plan is to decolonize Canada, right? And so what does that mean? I mean, if you decolonize Canada to where it was 300 years ago, we're talking about running around with bow and arrows, in a Stone Age. That's where we're at. And so, but Agenda 21, I mean, they want to be able to take down the capitalist West. And they're using this whole climate con thing to be able to do this. And then on another angle, another attack angle is this whole story of reconciliation that we have to somehow reconcile everything. And if you're going to reconcile it, you're going to have to give the land back. That's where it's basically heading. It has to go there, right? And South Africa basically taught us what reconciliation leads to. Read that graphic there.
A lot of these banks have already been given billions of dollars in retribution, from the Harper era right on up to the Trudeau, government who kind of tripled the funding, the amount of taxpayer.
It was like, it's been $20 billion a year going to Indian issues over, I think last year was 30 billion. They have to grease the palms of everyone to go along with this whole takeover.
And apparently
what these Indian bands need to understand, the chiefs and everyone else, is that they're going to be used. They think, okay, great, we're going to gain it all back and everything else like that. And they're licking their chops because they're going to make all this money. But they're going to be used to be able to complete this Agenda 21. And they're going to be this, looked at too as the stewards of the land. And they believe that North America is Turtle Island, right? It's a living organism type of thing, and it saved humanity. It's a whole story behind that. But if you go and put a dam on a river, or you go and mine, you're hurting this turtle. So they're going to be used to deindustrialize, and everyone's going to be upset with them. They're going to be the scapegoats. And it's not going to go well for them when people get upset.
So when we look at the bigger picture, we're talking about a global agenda here to relinquish national sovereignty. And what you're suggesting is they're going to use the Aboriginal communities and the First Nations as an excuse for retributions to, first of all, take away private land ownership, which is
Yes.
probably a major first step.
Own nothing and be happy.
Right. Own nothing and be happy. So they're going to have to relinquish not only their national sovereignty, but incrementally before that happens, they got to take away your private land ownership. And as you said,
Yeah.
they're using them to be able to make this happen. The very same groups who should be, very leery of what the government does are welcoming this, probably because of the billions of dollars they're getting and being duped into going along with all of this, right?
Not just the money, but the whole idea of being able to govern. Because if they own the land, if they're the rights and title holders of the land, they call the shots. Everything has to go through them, right? So,
right. And so that's why this is a potentially precedent-setting case here in BC, because, if this can happen here, this can essentially happen anywhere. So I think a lot of private homeowners are right now should be a little bit concerned, because if you think you own it, you don't necessarily own it, as
No.
it showed.
Well, I've been telling people for 6 years that we're going to lose our land rights in Canada. And it's going to be through this mechanism. And it's going full steam ahead in the background. And this is bubbling to the surface with this one particular little thing. But, people have to, I have a playlist. Go to my channel, Ron Vaillant on YouTube. There's a playlist for UNDRIP. Go through those videos. And there's actually another video. If you want to know where it's all headed, there's a video called The End Goal. I think it might not be in that playlist. I'll have to check if it's not all added on there. But ultimately it's to eviscerate us of private property rights and to have it so that they always talk about the common good and everything else like that, and that we have to, have everything lead towards justice. Justice is the end goal. Reconciliation is just the scheme or the mechanism to lead us down a certain path, but the end of the path is justice, social justice, environmental justice, and on and on. And so that video talks about that, and so it's just basically this whole takeover, this new world order takeover. We're going to be basically reduced down to subsistence levels, and we won't have the power to fight back, because it's the capitalist West and Christianity that actually will fight this thing. Because when you go into the UN, you realize that they have a whole totally different kind of spiritual view, and it's based on Hinduism and Buddhism, right? It's the mystical, Eastern philosophies, right? And Christianity is not going to fit into that picture. And ultimately, that's where the end goal is to deal with Christianity. Christianity has to go in order to have this new age global consciousness.
Yeah, and it's all being done under the guise of reconciliation and retribution.
Yeah.
Absolutely unbelievable stuff. So you mentioned
one thing here, though, talking about the reconciliation, is that we pull up this graphic. South Africa has already dealt with this thing. They've had reconciliation with apartheid and everything else. And then you had the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, who was in government there, Julius Malema. He says, the time for reconciliation is over. Now is the time for justice. So that word justice is very important. And the fact that David Lamenti was the justice minister in that video that hopefully we can pull up and show people, who talks about how, to decolonize Canada is more than the mandate of one government. He was a justice minister, right? That's not by coincidence, I don't think. Anyhow, now is the time for justice, this guy says. We must ensure that we restore the dignity. Remember, that's another word, dignity. That's a very papal word. You'll see the Pope talk about dignity of our people without compensating the criminals who stole our land, right? So these farmers over there in South Africa, they probably bought their land or maybe got it handed down to them by their parents. But this guy goes ahead, and then so they go and change the South African constitution to allow the blacks to take the white farmers' land, and they've been slaughtered over there. And it's not really newsworthy, I guess, because it's just something that's swept under the carpet or not to be seen, I guess, is the biggest thing. But that is the path that we are on here in Canada, although, it's going to be slightly different, obviously, but we're in a situation where we're going to lose, Canada, I guess, in a sense. And we're going to be second-class citizens.
Yeah, and this is
Indian, Inuit, and Métis.
Well, they are using these bans as kind of the first set of dominoes for Canadians to fall when it comes to robbing us of our own private land, private homes, private businesses. And that's the truly scary part of this precedent-setting case is the fact that you're not going to own your own stuff. Like you said, the WEF's vision, you will own nothing and apparently be happy about it, right? So absolutely insane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why people need to see that video on the playlist. It's called End Goal. That's where we're headed. It was actually a 1 hour video. I edited it down to 26 minutes. And I thought, oh, it's still too long. And I brought it down to 9 minutes. Okay. And it still captures the basic gist of what's going on. So.
All right. Well, I will include links to all of that in the description to make sure if people want to, bone up on what's happening here, make sure you check all of this out. Do you have any kind of final thoughts on where this is heading and what Canadians should be thinking in regards to this precedent-setting case?
Well, BC basically adopted UNDRIP in 2019 in November. And that was all being done behind the scenes. They had planned this for a long time, and people who were working in the government were not allowed to talk about it. They had gag orders. And now all of this is going on behind the scenes. It's going to be sprung upon us, and then we're going to not, it'll be too late, right? And so what has to happen is that the MLAs need to be informed as to what's going on. I've been trying to do that myself as well. And because it's the government who's imposing this on us. And if we can actually stop the government from doing that, then we can stop this. But the provinces should be fighting Bill C-15, because Bill C-15 says that all Canadian law has to be according to UNDRIP, a UN document, right? Which in Article 26 says that the Indigenous can have right to all of the lands, territories, and resources they've ever used, or even walked on, type of thing, right? And they use this word territories all the time. This is our territory, kind of a thing, because that wording is in the UN document there. And Article 46 says that no state, nation, individual, can go against the Charter of the United Nations. So this is all just it's a big setup, and people need to be willing. It's like wartime. In war, if you were to go and rush the enemy, you might get shot in order for your group to be able to win. Well, that's what it's going to take in order for people to fight this thing, because it's going to come to a point one day when we're going to have to start paying them taxes because we're on their land. And when you have your property tax, I expect it might be included in that or it might be separate, but there's going to be an Indigenous tax added onto it. And if you pay that tax, you're acknowledging you're on their land. And if that's where people have to fight it at that point, that's pretty much too late in a sense. But the whole thing is, okay, if we have time, is that in the article, the judge talks about, it's actually, they are the rights and title holders due to the Canadian Constitution. And I mean, the only things in the Canadian Constitution that, Jesuit trained Pierre Trudeau created was Article 35 or Section 35, where it identifies who the Aboriginals are, the Indian, Inuit, and Métis. And then it goes on and talks about how, any land claims they've made to be honored and stuff like that, benign stuff, you'd think, right? And then it refers to also Section 25 of that charter. So when you go to Section 25, it talks about the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And in the article from the Vancouver City Council, and they're talking about their under strategy plan, they're saying that these three bands have title to all of Vancouver on account of the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which really, that was like an internal memo of the King saying to all of the people in Canada and the United States, like, look, don't start doing individual land claims or agreements with the various Indian bands. We forbade it, because basically we're going to do it down the road, right? But And they said to treat anything west of the Appalachian Mountains as an Indian reserve. And this is where the court cases are being won. And this is where people, lawyers and whatnot, they have to start, really digging into this to see, because obviously, there's nothing that I know of that counteracts that after the fact. But we see by evidence that because there was all this development done west of the Appalachians, that came to a point where it was no longer valid. So what wasn't, to me, an internal memo is being used as their land claims, saying that this is our land because this is an Indian reserve.
Unbelievable stuff.
It is.
Yeah, wild stuff. Thank you so much for helping us understand this. Again, I want to encourage everybody to make sure you check those links in the description below to catch up on what's happening, because if it can happen to them, it can happen to you guys, and that's what this all boils down to. So once again, I want to encourage everybody to check out those links in the description below, because this is precedent-setting times, and we have to fight it, like Ron said, now, before it's too late. Guys, if you appreciate our efforts to bring you this information, please check the links in the description below to where you can support my efforts here at Press for Truth, and make sure you click that thumbs up button, guys. Make sure you share this video with your friends and family who you think need to see it the most, and stay tuned, guys. I'm going to have more video reports coming soon. This is Dan Dicks reporting for Press for Truth. We all want truth. The truth will set you free.